Hello, I'm Helen Ottewell, Learning Manager for Jersey Heritage, and I'm going to talk to you about the Hougue Bie Dolmen and why it's such an important building, what it is, when it was built, what was found in it, and how it was built. The Hougue Bie can be counted as one of the 10 oldest buildings in the whole world. It isn't a place where people lived, but was built as a building to hold special ceremonies and to bury people. It's a building where people worship. The people I'm talking about are the people who were living in Jersey about 6,000 years ago in the Neolithic age. So why is it so special? It's the longest and best preserved passage grave in Europe. It's one of the top 10 oldest buildings in the world, and it's got a mound of earth on it, which is really unusual. It's older than the Pyramids of Giza and Stonehenge by over 1,500 years. It's on an equinoctial alignment, which is something I'll talk about later. It's got two side chambers which are opposite each other and an end chamber too. It was only first excavated in 1924 and then again in the 1990s. What was found inside? Well, surprisingly, there were only a few artifacts found. They included 2 intact vase supports and fragments of 19 others. Human bones from 8 different people, but not many bones. Animal bones from cattle, sheep and pig, some shells, 2 beads and some flint tools. One of the big questions is how long did it take to build and how did they do it? Well, we don't know. We can have a go at answering those questions by talking to experimental archaeologists, who are people who have a go at doing it like they did in the Neolithic age. So they give us clues as to how they moved and positioned the large stones, using sledges, ropes and seaweed, wet seaweed even. After some experiments that archaeologists have done, we think that the 20-ton capstone, the largest stone used in the building of the Hougue Bie, would have needed about 120 people to pull it on a sledge. That means if 200 people were involved in building it, they would have needed about 160 days to bring all the big stone and 200 days to carry the smaller stone in baskets from where it was found, and that is just getting the stone there. So we think an informed estimate of work hours would be about a 200-strong team of people spending about a decade on the project. However, in reality, it probably took a lot longer with lots of different people working on it over time. Experimental archaeologists are still trying to work out how they built it. They've done experiments of how to lift up the upright stones on the side, but haven't yet been able to work out how to lift them on top without needing any mechanics. So as I said from the start, the Hougue Bie Dolmen is one of the largest and best preserved passage graves in Europe. So what's a passage grave? Well, it's a type of monument which is like a long corridor with spaces where people would have been buried. We know it was built around 6,000 years ago, and it wasn't built to look like it does now at the same time. Instead, it has been added to and changed over hundreds of years. The mound is 12.2 meters high and 58 meters in diameter going around the base of the mound. It's an unusual type of dolmen because it's got this large mound of earth on the top of the dolmen. The Neolithic people covered it up with earth and rubble. The Hougue Bie may even take its name from the Norse word of hugir, meaning mound. It was discovered and excavated in 1924. The building that you see on top of this mound here is a medieval chapel, and it was built there around 800 to 900 years ago. This probably meant that the dolmen underneath wasn't known about, because the front entrance that we go into now was also covered up with earth and rubble, so no one knew it was there. Originally, the dolmen we know was smaller, and then it's been added to over time. Even though it was added to over the time, all of the work and the building of the dolmen would have happened during the Neolithic age. If we took the mound of earth away from the dolmen and looked down onto the top of the dolmen, it would look a bit like this, with that long passage, that corridor, 2 side chambers and an end chamber in the main chamber. The large stones in the middle of this picture are what the dolmen looked like when it was first excavated. There were 3 large stones on the floor in front of the end chamber. These have been moved now, so it doesn't look like this when we go into it now. The tomb entrance faces east, and I'll talk about why this is important later. As you can see, the mound is made of rubble and covered with this dry stone walling, the smaller stones surrounding the main entrance. The tomb was actually sort of closed down and sealed using one of these large entrance stones. We don't know exactly when or who did it, but we think it was deliberately done so that it meant that it was not officially in use by the people living in Jersey at the time. It's a bit like closing a building. Dolmen is a Breton word for stone table, which is 3 stones, 2 upright and 1 resting on top, the capstone, so that it looks like a table. It's a type of megalithic monument, which just means large stone. Mega means large and lithic means stone. The height of the entrance is about 1 meter high. I'm 5'4" and I have to duck right down and crouch walking into it a bit like a crab to get in. The next few pictures I'm going to show you are going to be as we walk into the dolmen, so you'll have to use your imagination a bit, just a bit like we were there walking into it. It's very low to start off with, and it's sloped so that when you walk into the passage, you have to crouch down, but by the time you get to the end chamber, you're able to stand up. This was deliberately done. This is the entrance just about to walk inside. You can still see the light outside, and you're surrounded by standing stones on the side and on the top. The whole monument is the longest in Europe at 18 meters for its entire length. You can sort of split it into 2 areas, as I showed you from the map earlier. The passage, which is this long corridor you can see here, going straight in, and then the chamber where it opens out and you can finally stand up. The passage is 9 meters long and the chamber is 9 meters long. You can see here how it's darker all of a sudden. We've gone maybe 3 or 4 steps into the dolmen, and today there are small electric lights so we can see where we are in there. But we think the Neolithic people would have used torches with flames to light up the dolmen if they needed it. About 1 meter into the dolmen, if you look up, you'll see concrete instead of granite. This is because the original capstones that were put there in the Neolithic age had fallen down, and it was decided in 1924 when the dolmen was first excavated not to put them back up, but instead put some concrete in its place to make it safe to walk under. As you walk further and further in, the height increases and you get to 3 stones. 1 on the north or the right, and then 2 on the south. They're in a kind of zigzag pattern. This is where the passage opens up into the chamber. These are the 3 stones which are standing up, and we call these upright stones orthostats. You can see that they're not really part of the passage building. In this picture, you can just see the 2 on the south side. And I know that when I get to the second upright stone, it is safe for me to stand up without hitting my head. This is the left-hand side of the chamber again, with the large stone facing inwards. They're not holding up the capstones along the side, and they're infilled with smaller stones in between them. Almost opposite these stones, there's a really unusual and very important stone. It's a stone that almost looks like it's lying on its side, and it's got small dips in the surface. You can see them in shadow here. These are called cut marks, and they were deliberately made by the Neolithic people to decorate the stone, creating art. So this is Neolithic art. However, it's a really strange place for this rock to be though. It's on its side and you can't really see it very well. This maybe suggests that the stone might have been used for another monument before, in the same place at Hougue Bie, but using this stone as a monument, and then it was reused to create Hougue Bie Dolmen as it is today. The main chamber here has got 2 side chambers which are opposite each other and an end cell. I can stand up here quite easily, and it's quite a large space. We can fit an entire class in here, usually with teachers and helpers too. The fact that there are 2 side chambers is actually very unusual and makes this dolmen even more special. There are hardly any dolmens in the world with this type of arrangement. If we're standing in the centre of the chamber at the end of the passage, we would see these side chambers. You can see it's raised off the ground and it's got almost like an entranceway. This is where we think the burials would have been. You can clearly see here the dolmen. It's got the two upright stones and the capstone on the top, creating that table. Inside, it's about the length of a Labrador, so that a person would have been buried inside in the ground here. This is the inside of the south chamber. Now you can see just outside there is another type of rock. This is a pillar. It was put there in 1924 because the stone above it had a crack in it. You can see the pillar here again. All of the stone used in the dolmen comes from the eastern side of Jersey, from around the area of Fort Regent and Elizabeth Castle. And of course, they wouldn't have been there then, but that's where the rock comes from, and from Grouville and St Clement coasts, Le Roc and Le Hoc. We know that because of the type of rock it is. Geologists are able to work out where the different rocks come from in the island, and they can tell that it came from these places. But there's one stone that comes from somewhere completely different. The end stone, the terminal cell orthostat, which just means end room upright stone, comes from Montmado in St John, which is a completely different direction and a place from all the other rocks. But why? Well, we think there's possibly two reasons. One was that it was put there after the main part of the dolmen had been built, a later addition to the monument, or they wanted it to be different and perhaps more special than any of the others. This is a photo of the entrance to the chamber at the end, the terminal cell. You can see the dolmen shape again, that two side stones and the one on top. And this is the entrance to the chamber at the end. Here you should be able to see that there's a small step up onto this area. When the dolmen was originally excavated, there were three large stones on the floor of the main chamber. One of them was put onto the floor of this entrance to make a step, and the other two are outside of the dolmen in the grounds of Le Hougue Bie Museum. In the terminal cell, there's a stone on the floor. This is a quernstone. It was used for grinding corn into flour. It was found underneath the terminal standing stone at the end, and after the first excavation in 1924 was taken out from underneath and put on the floor of the cell of the chamber. Having a quernstone in this area shows how special farming was to the Neolithic people. It was the Neolithic people who were the first to build permanent homes and who became first farmers. So having a quernstone here in this area shows that the farming is the most important thing in their lives. At the very end of the passage grave in the terminal cell, we have this stone. This is the different stone. It wasn't actually used for building the dolmen. If you can see, it hasn't got any stones resting on it or at the side, and it's different because of where it comes from. This is the one that comes from St John. It also creates an even smaller room at the end. This is another puzzle for archaeologists and historians. It wouldn't have been big enough to bury anyone in this area, in this small, tiny little room at the end, and it's a hidden space away from the rest of the chamber. So we're not sure what it's for. But thinking about modern day places of worship, which is what Le Hougue Bie would have been to the Neolithic people, there are usually sacred places in them where religious items are stored or prepared. So it might be something similar. In the small terminal cell here, you can see this room. It might be that this large stone was put in at a later date, and it's quite a small area. I usually can have about 4 or 5, maybe year 2 children fitting in there together. It's really not a very big space. You could see there was a small stone. This is the close-up of that stone. This is not a large stone. It's only about a drink bottle worth high. It's called a betial. It's possibly a ritual stone and important to the Neolithic people because of where they put it. But yet again, this is another puzzle for archaeologists and historians. Unfortunately, the people who built the dolmens didn't write anything down to tell us what their things were for. Looking back from the end chamber, standing on that step, looking back to where we've come from, you can see the upright stones and the capstones as the passage. The stone closest to us, this one at the top, the capstone, is the largest capstone in the building. This is the largest stone used in the building of Hougue Bie. From measuring it and knowing how much stones weigh, we've estimated that it weighs about 20 tons, which is about the same weight as 2.5 T-Rexes, 20 great sharks, or 250 adults. And this goes back to the experimental archaeologists. If they haven't been able to work out how just a few hundred people could lift that weight all the way up on top of the other stones. Now, remember at the beginning, I talked about one of the reasons why Hougue Bie is so special and said it was because of some fancy words, the equinoctial alignment. Well, what does that mean? Well, basically it means that a dolmen faces a certain way so that something happens to it on the equinox. The passage grave at Hougue Bie faces exactly east, where the sun rises. The equinox just happens twice a year, in March and September, in spring and autumn. And the equinox is when the sun and the earth are aligned together, so they're matched at the same time, and their sun passes directly over the equator, meaning there's exactly 12 hours of day and exactly 12 hours of night. When the sun rises on the day of the equinox, it shines at a particular angle, which means the sun's rays shine into the passage grave. Then the sun hits the back of the passage grave on the stones of the terminal cell. You can see the step that we talked about earlier lighting up here with those pebbles lit up in the front. As the sun rises, it makes this beautiful shaft of light shining all the way down the passage. It looks golden. Some children have said that it looks a bit like a floor of lava. It only happens twice a year, in March and September. It's a really spectacular and special thing to see, and it makes the dolmen even more special. Looking out towards the entranceway, you can see how the passage grave lights up and that it shows the floor is made from small beach pebbles. You can see them lit up by the sun. The whole chamber is so light in there you can actually read a book. This equinox makes the passage grave an even more important place for Neolithic rituals. It only happens at the spring and autumn equinox, meaning that it might be that these are the times that are important to the Neolithic people, perhaps because of their farming and the start of growing and harvesting seasons. Hougue Bie has always been a special place. This final photograph is of a spectacular equinox taken in March 2020 and shows how big it is inside and some of those huge stones. We look forward to seeing you at Hougue Bie so that you can get inside the chamber and the dolmen and see it for yourself.